Graham Whitmore and Lila Harris seemed like an unlikely pair, a respected judge and a shy teenage girl, but behind closed doors, their secret connection would ignite a chain of events so dark. It ended in the shocking deaths of two innocent lives and rocked the quiet town of Ashford to its core. In the quiet town of Ashford, life seemed simple and orderly. Streets were lined with neat houses, children played safely in parks, and neighbors knew each other by name. Among them, Judge Graham Whitmore stood out not just because of his tall stature and commanding presence, but because of the respect he had earned over 20 years on the bench. In court, he was known for his sharp mind and unwavering fairness, delivering judgments that often left both lawyers and citizens nodding in reluctant agreement. People admired him, trusted him, and some even looked up to him as the embodiment of justice. Outside the courtroom, Graham's life appeared equally perfect. He lived in a grand Victorian mansion at the edge of town, a home filled with antique furniture, expensive art, and a carefully manicured garden. On weekends, he attended charity events, hosted elegant dinners, and gave speeches about integrity and morality. To the townspeople, he was untouchable, a man who seemed to have everything under control. Even his marriage to Clara Whitmore, a well-known socialite, appeared idyllic. Together, they were the perfect couple, a pair that seemed straight out of a magazine. But beneath the polished exterior, Graham harbored a darkness that no one suspected. Behind closed doors, his life was governed not by law or order, but by obsession and secret desires. He spent hours alone in his study, reading letters, keeping journals, and making plans that he would never share with anyone. His colleagues noticed a subtle change over time, a certain intensity in his eyes, a distracted manner when he thought no one was watching. Yet, Graham was careful. He hid his true nature behind charm, routine, and the veneer of respectability that only someone in his position could command. Graham's evenings often followed a predictable rhythm. After returning from the court, he would take a long walk in the garden, seemingly lost in thought, before retiring to his study. There, surrounded by the dim glow of a desk lamp, he would work on legal research, correspondences, or his private notes. No one knew that in these quiet hours, he was not only reflecting on cases, but also contemplating desires that society would condemn if discovered. The mansion, once a symbol of security and wealth, had become a place of secrets, a stage for the parts of Graham's life that the world would never see. Even in public, small signs hinted at the man behind the mask. Neighbors occasionally remarked on the way he lingered too long at the library or the subtle, almost imperceptible way he observed younger townspeople. Most dismissed these observations as harmless eccentricities, the quirks of a man dedicated to his work and community. But Graham's fascination with control and attention was growing, shaping decisions and actions that would eventually shatter the life he had built. In Ashford, no one imagined the darkness lurking behind the judge's esteemed reputation. To the outside world, Graham Whitmore was a figure of integrity, a guardian of justice. Yet, within the walls of his mansion, the seeds of obsession and forbidden desire were quietly taking root, setting the stage for events that would shock the town, destroy lives, and reveal that even the most respected individuals can hide terrifying secrets. Everything changed the day Graham met Lila Harris. She was 17, small-framed, and quiet, with wide eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. Lila had grown up in a fractured household. Her parents' divorce had left her shy and uncertain, always searching for guidance and approval. She spent her afternoons volunteering at the Ashford Library, shelving books and helping younger children find stories that could transport them from the loneliness she often felt at home. It was there, amid the smell of old paper and polished wood, that Graham first noticed her. At first, his interest seemed harmless, a judge taking an interest in a bright young volunteer. He offered advice about school, shared stories from his youth, and appeared genuinely fascinated by her intelligence. To anyone observing from a distance, it was mentorship, almost paternal in tone. But what began as guidance slowly transformed into something far more dangerous. Graham started finding reasons to meet Lila outside the library. He offered to drive her home from errands, invited her to attend cultural events, and brought her small gifts, a book she had mentioned, a rare flower he had picked, or tickets to the theater. At first, Lila accepted these gestures with gratitude, thinking she had found a mentor who genuinely cared for her future. She didn't yet understand that Graham's attention was not innocent. It was deliberate, calculated, and soon all-consuming. Graham's obsession grew quietly but steadily. He began to track her schedule, noting when she would be alone and when her parents were away. He made sure his meetings seemed casual, natural, always under the guise of concern or mentorship. Lila, feeling special and noticed in a way she never had before, began to rely on him emotionally. Her friends noticed the change. She seemed distant, often distracted, and unusually secretive. But Graham was careful. He maintained a public persona that made it impossible for anyone to suspect him. In town, he was still the upright judge, the man of honor. No one could imagine that the same hands that passed judgment in court could be orchestrating such a dangerous personal entanglement. As the weeks passed, the boundaries blurred. Private letters were exchanged, and late-night walks under the cover of darkness became frequent. Lila's dependence on Graham grew, and with it, her isolation from others. The young girl who had once spent afternoons with friends and family now devoted much of her time to him, believing she had found someone who truly understood her. But in reality, Graham's fixation was deepening, evolving into control and manipulation. Every smile, every compliment, and every act of attention was a calculated step, drawing Lila further into a web from which escape would become increasingly difficult. To the outside world, it all looked ordinary. A respected judge mentoring a bright young volunteer seemed natural, even admirable. But behind closed doors, the relationship was anything but innocent. It was a secret world, hidden from public view, where admiration and mentorship twisted into obsession and possession. The foundation of what would become a shocking tragedy had been laid quietly, unnoticed, leaving no warning signs for the town that the respected Graham Whitmore was about to cross lines that could never be undone. As the secret connection between Graham and Lila deepened, whispers began to stir in Ashford, though no one could yet put the pieces together. Some neighbors noticed subtle signs that something was off. Graham, who had always kept a strict routine, was now seen walking late at night, lingering near Lila's apartment, or parking his car in shadowed corners where no one would notice. People assumed he was simply busy or attending to legal matters, but a small, uneasy feeling began to spread among those who had known him for years. Lila's friends, too, sensed a change. She became withdrawn, rarely answering calls from people who had once been close to her. Her laughter, once easy and frequent, was replaced with long periods of silence and distracted gazes. No one could have guessed the true nature of Graham's influence. His status as a judge shielded him from suspicion, giving him an untouchable aura. People respected him too much to question him, and even if someone had doubts, the fear of accusing a figure of authority kept them silent. In the rare moments when someone did wonder, Graham's charm and careful demeanor erased any concern. He was a master at maintaining appearances. In public, he remained the image of integrity, attentive at community events, polite to neighbors, and devoted to his charity work. Behind closed doors, however, a different story unfolded, a story of manipulation, obsession, and a control so subtle that Lila herself barely recognized it. Graham's fascination with Lila began to shape his every action. He monitored her routines, noting her habits, her friends, and the moments when she might be alone. He controlled the timing of their meetings with meticulous care, always ensuring that no one would suspect anything. Gifts were no longer casual. They became tools of influence, subtle rewards that encouraged dependence. Every compliment, every show of attention, was a calculated reinforcement of Lila's attachment to him. Slowly, the young girl's world narrowed, revolving almost entirely around the judge. The independence she had once had, the freedom to think or act without restraint, began to slip away. The town of Ashford, blissfully unaware of the danger unfolding in its midst, continued its daily routines. People greeted Graham with respect, sometimes admiration, never imagining that the same man who presided over justice was quietly eroding the boundaries of morality in his private life. Lila's parents noticed her distance, but they attributed it to teenage moodiness and the stress of her volunteer work. Friends worried, but their concern was met with vague excuses and subtle deflections. Graham had created an environment where suspicion was nearly impossible, a carefully constructed reality that kept his obsession hidden while tightening its grip. By this point, the relationship was no longer simply a secret. It had become a dangerous dynamic, a power imbalance masked by appearances. Every step Lila took seemed guided by Graham, every choice subtly influenced. The quiet town of Ashford, with its peaceful streets and trusting community, had no idea that a storm was quietly building, a storm that would erupt in tragedy, shattering lives and exposing a darkness that no one could have imagined. The whispers had begun, but the full truth was still far from being revealed. One stormy night, Ashford awoke to a shock that no one could have anticipated. Graham's wife, Clara Whitmore, was found dead in the grand mansion that had always been a symbol of the family's wealth and stability. The discovery sent ripples through the town. News traveled fast, and neighbors whispered in disbelief. How could someone so respected, so seemingly upright, be connected to such a tragedy? The initial reports suggested a burglary gone wrong, but the details did not fit. The scene of the crime was peculiar. There were signs of struggle, but nothing had been taken. It was as if the violence had been personal, deliberate, and chillingly intimate. Police arrived promptly, their presence casting a heavy shadow over the mansion. Officers documented the scene meticulously, but even they struggled to make sense of it. Clara had been a social figure, kind to neighbors and active in the community. There seemed to be no enemies, no clear motive, and no warning signs that could have predicted such an outcome. Graham, who had been away attending a late court session, returned home to a house transformed into a crime scene. His composed demeanor did little to reassure investigators. He appeared calm, too calm, as if he were carefully measuring his reactions, a calculated mask hiding what he truly felt. Friends and colleagues were shaken. Those who had known the couple for years found themselves questioning everything. How well did anyone really know the Whitmores? Publicly, their marriage had seemed flawless. Clara was elegant, poised, and intelligent, while Graham was respected and admired. Privately, however, cracks in their relationship had been invisible to outsiders. The violence that claimed Clara's life suggested a hidden tension, a secret that the town could not see, but that had been growing beneath the surface for years. Rumors began to circulate. Some whispered about Graham's odd behavior, about his late-night walks, and his unusual interest in certain younger members of the community. Others found the idea impossible to accept. A judge of his standing committing such an act seemed beyond comprehension. But the more time passed, the more details emerged that hinted at a darker truth. Clara's death was not random, and it was not the work of an intruder. Someone close had orchestrated it, someone with knowledge of her routines and the household. Even as police worked tirelessly to investigate, Graham maintained his public image. To the town, he was grieving, composed, and dignified. He attended memorial services, answered reporters' questions politely, and reassured neighbors that the tragedy had shaken him deeply. Yet behind closed doors, his mind was far from outward appearances. The control he had exerted over Lila and others had shifted into a dangerous obsession, and Clara's death was a grim turning point. The events of that night marked the beginning of a sequence that would spiral further into horror, exposing secrets that Ashford would never forget. The mansion, once a place of elegance and respectability, became a silent witness to tragedy. Every room held memories, now tainted by violence. The town tried to comprehend how a man entrusted with justice could preside over such cruelty in his own home. Fear and suspicion began to seep into the streets, as neighbors wondered who could be trusted and what other secrets might be hidden behind closed doors. The calm town of Ashford would never feel safe again. Weeks after Clara's death, Ashford tried to return to a fragile sense of normalcy, but the shadows of tragedy still lingered. Then came the news that would shake the town even further. Lila Harris had disappeared. Her parents reported her missing after she failed to return home one evening, and friends described her absence as sudden and alarming. The library where she had spent so much time became a scene of frantic searches and whispered fears. People could not imagine that someone so young and full of promise could simply vanish without a trace. Panic spread quietly as those who had once admired Graham Whitmore began to feel a creeping sense of unease. Hours later, Lila's body was discovered in a forest several miles outside Ashford. The scene was disturbing. She had been attacked, her death violent and sudden. Investigators noted evidence suggesting she had tried to escape someone she trusted, someone who had known her routines and could manipulate her movements. Shock rippled through the community. The young girl who had seemed so full of life and hope had been silenced, and the carefully constructed facade of Ashford's safety began to crumble. As the investigation progressed, police uncovered troubling links between Lila and Graham Whitmore. Letters, notes, and traces of communication painted a picture that was almost unbelievable. The judge, once revered for his intellect and fairness, was now at the center of a horrifying revelation. His obsession with Lila had evolved into something deadly. He had used his influence, charm, and knowledge of her vulnerabilities to isolate her, control her, and ultimately end her life when she could no longer be contained within the web he had woven. The town's disbelief turned to horror. Neighbors who had once waved to Graham in passing began to question every interaction, every polite gesture, every late-night walk they had dismissed as harmless. Lila's friends were devastated, grappling with guilt for not recognizing the danger she had faced. Even Ashford's police officers, trained to deal with crime and deception, found themselves unsettled by the depth of manipulation and cruelty at play. Graham's actions defied logic and morality, revealing a darkness that lurked beneath the surface of respectability. The case quickly drew national attention. Newspapers, television stations, and social media carried stories of the trusted judge who had orchestrated the deaths of two people closest to him. Experts in criminal behavior dissected the case, explaining how obsession, power, and secrecy had combined to create a chilling pattern. Graham's careful planning, his ability to maintain appearances, and his exploitation of trust made him a terrifying figure. Every revelation seemed worse than the last, and the town that had once looked up to him now struggled to comprehend how such evil could hide in plain sight. By the time investigators pieced together the timeline of Graham's involvement, it became clear that Lila's death was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of control and obsession that had escalated dangerously. The case marked a turning point for Ashford, a moment when the town realized that appearances could be deadly, that even those in positions of authority could harbor secrets capable of destroying lives. Lila's death left a void that no one could fill, and her memory became a symbol of innocence lost and the terrifying consequences of unchecked obsession. The arrest of Graham Whitmore sent shockwaves through Ashford and across the UK. The judge who had once symbolized integrity and fairness was now the central figure in one of the most chilling cases in recent history. Police had gathered enough evidence to remove all doubt about his involvement in the deaths of both Clara and Lila. For the first time, the town saw the man behind the polished mask, and the image was horrifying. His arrest was quiet, conducted in the early hours to avoid public chaos, but news of it spread like wildfire. Crowds of neighbors and reporters gathered outside the mansion, their faces a mixture of disbelief, fear, and outrage. Inside the courtroom, the trial became a spectacle. The prosecution meticulously presented the evidence, revealing the carefully constructed web Graham had spun. Letters between Graham and Lila, previously hidden in the judge's private study, were shown to the jury. They contained subtle manipulations, ifs designed to bind Lila emotionally, and veiled threats that revealed the depth of his control. Forensic evidence linked Graham directly to both deaths, and witness statements painted a picture of a man obsessed with power and control. Experts testified about how his position as a judge had given him unique means to manipulate others and evade suspicion. Each revelation made the courtroom increasingly tense, the public unable to believe what they were hearing. The defense attempted to portray Graham as a grieving husband and mentor, overwhelmed by tragic circumstances. But the evidence was overwhelming. Emails and documents contradicted his claims, showing premeditation and a pattern of manipulation. Every detail revealed a man who had used his authority to satisfy a dangerous obsession, someone who had carefully orchestrated his crimes while maintaining a flawless public image. A jury struggled with the magnitude of betrayal, the idea that a figure of justice could commit acts so calculated and brutal. As the trial progressed, the community of Ashford watched in horror and fascination. Every day brought new details, exposing the extent of Graham's manipulation and obsession. Neighbors who had once trusted him began to question every interaction, every polite smile, and every act of charity. Families wondered how someone in a position of authority could abuse trust so completely. Even the police officers who had investigated the case admitted to being disturbed by the cold precision of Graham's planning. The courtroom became a place where the truth unfolded like a slow-burning revelation, leaving everyone present unsettled and horrified. When the verdict was finally delivered, Graham was sentenced to life imprisonment. The judge's chambers, once a symbol of authority and respect, were now a haunting reminder of betrayal. Ashford, a town that had prided itself on trust and community, struggled to recover from the shock. The case became a cautionary tale, illustrating how appearances could be deceiving and how obsession could escalate into devastating violence. The deaths of Clara and Lila left scars that would never fully heal, and Graham Whitmore's fall from grace served as a chilling reminder that darkness can hide behind even the most respectable facade. After Graham Whitmore's conviction, Ashford was left to grapple with the aftermath of a tragedy that had shaken the town to its core. The mansion where the murders had occurred was abandoned, its grand halls silent, and the once beautiful gardens overgrown. Neighbors avoided it, whispering about the darkness that had lingered within its walls. The town's sense of safety had been shattered. People who had once believed in the integrity of their community leaders now found themselves questioning everything. Families were more cautious, children were watched more closely, and a shadow of fear hung over the streets where trust had once been assumed. Lila Harris's memory became a symbol of lost innocence. In schools and libraries, people remembered her bright smile, her love for books, and the potential that had been stolen from her. Memorials were quietly organized, and scholarships were set up in her name to honor her life, though nothing could undo the pain her family and friends endured. Clara Whitmore's death, too, became a somber topic of conversation. People remembered her elegance, her kindness, and the life she had led before it was cut short. Both deaths served as grim reminders of how quickly appearances can deceive, and how the darkest actions can come from those who seem most trustworthy. The trial and its revelations left a lasting impact on Ashford's perception of authority. Parents became wary of who they allowed into their homes. Colleagues scrutinized those in power, and the general public approached community figures with a newfound skepticism. Discussions about Graham Whitmore's crimes dominated the town for months, dissecting every detail, every choice, and every hidden motive. Psychologists and criminal experts were invited to speak at local schools and community centers about recognizing, manipulation, and understanding the warning signs of obsession. Ashford became a place where caution replaced innocence, where vigilance replaced blind trust. Even in prison, Graham remained a figure of fascination. Reporters and criminologists studied his behavior, trying to understand the mind of a man who had been so calculated, so manipulative, and yet so respected. His fall from grace was analyzed as a case study in obsession, abuse of power, and the dangers of unchecked authority. People debated how someone with such intelligence and social standing could commit crimes so cold and deliberate. The story of Graham Whitmore was no longer just a local tragedy. It became a chilling narrative for the entire country, a warning about the shadows that can hide behind respectability. Years later, Ashford began to heal, but the scars remained. The mansion was eventually demolished, replaced by a park where children could play safely, though older residents still remembered the darkness that had once occupied the land. Lila and Clara's memories were preserved through small acts of remembrance, and the town's collective experience became a lesson in vigilance, empathy, and the importance of looking beneath the surface. Graham Whitmore's story, though concluded in court, left a haunting legacy, a reminder that trust can be exploited, that obsession can turn deadly, and that even the most respectable among us can harbor secrets capable of shattering lives forever.